All right, so I would like to welcome Alexandra Silva to PLMW. So Alexandra has worked on many very interesting research problems, and the topic of this talk is about that very daunting problem of all, which is finding out what is the right research problem for you. It's one of the more difficult aspects, especially early on in graduate school. So I'll let Alexandra take it away.
Okay, thanks, Paul, for the introduction. It's a great pleasure to speak at PLMW. PLMW is a workshop very close to my heart, and I'm sad I cannot be in Philadelphia today, but I'm glad that by having this hybrid workshop, we can include more of the community, and I hope it's working well both for the people on site and for the people who are online. So I will be talking about finding a research topic, and I added a subtitle to talk later on whether it's finding a research topic or really being found by a research topic. And you'll see what I mean by that a bit later in my talk. I have to say, it is daunting to give a talk at PLMW because people always think that you have something meaningful to say or very deep or some deep insight that will help you find the right way. And I want to dismiss that from the very beginning, that this is a very personal view on this question, which, as Paul said, it's a hard question, and it's a question that worries a lot of researchers as you go through your research career. And so I will share some very personal views on this. So please do not take anything of what I say today as a secret recipe, because there's definitely, I think, no secret recipe for this. I would like to try to make my talk a little bit interactive so that the audience can take maybe a bit more out of it than just what I want to share. But I will see if it works with this hybrid format. So hopefully Paul will be able to help me at some point, and we'll see how far we can get with a little bit of interaction. So I will start by talking about my own research journey and how I got into research. So I did a double bachelor in math and CS back in Portugal, where I'm from. And already that first choice of what I studied as an undergrad was a little bit by chance. My wish was to study mathematics, and my brother, who by the way studied Latin and Greek, was worried about employability for me, and so he convinced me that I should study something a bit more practical than mathematics, and that's how I ended up doing a double bachelor, basically to get him off my back and try to move on from that conversation. So I did math and CS, and as that undergraduate degree, as I went through that, I realized I really liked CS, and I wanted to work in computer science, and I thought I was going to go to industry. And then the last year of my undergrad, this postdoc joined the department. This Dutch postdoc joined the department, and there was an opportunity to learn from him and to work with him. And that basically led me to my first research project, and really it was the beginning of it all, and I ended up never leaving. So my very first experience with research was working on something called a framework called Codfish, and it was on strong types for relational databases. And so this was work with Joost Visser, and I can credit, I think, in many ways, Joost for teaching me the ropes and actually making me fall in love with research. And that's how I ended up never going to industry. And so we worked on this project. This became my final project of undergrad, and it was on functional programming. And Joost basically convinced me we should try to publish this work, and we submitted it to the Haskell workshop. And I ended up, it ended up getting accepted, and I flew there and gave my first talk there. And another thing I wanted to mention is that while I was there, the invited speaker that year was Stephanie Weirish. And for me, sitting at that first talk of the day by Stephanie was also life-changing in some ways. I didn't know many women who worked in computer science. In fact, when I was an undergrad, I was one of the few women who was there among hundreds of men. And so it was really refreshing at that time was already the start of my PhD, to see this extremely enthusiastic and articulated woman giving this keynote at the Haskell workshop. And it was really, really inspiring for me. And so I sort of was very happy that I had been working on functional programming and had ended up at the Haskell workshop. At that time, so Joost was Dutch, and he put me in touch with people in the Netherlands. And I had another colleague from undergrad who was also in the Netherlands doing his PhD. And that's how I ended up on my next sort of topic. So I moved to the Netherlands, and I started working with Jan Rutten and Marcelo Bonzangue, who had a PhD position, and they were interested in coalgebra. And so I learned about coalgebra, and I spent the next 4 years learning and trying to contribute to this field of coalgebra and co-induction. And I published some papers at the intersection of category theory, coalgebra, and automata. And these were happy years, and it was sort of quite different from my original project or my original research topic on functional programming. But it was very close to my original wish for an undergrad project, which was very mathsy. So I was quite happy working on coalgebra. And then at the end of my PhD, my examiner was Dexter Kozen, who is at Cornell. And Dexter, I ended up doing a postdoc with Dexter at Cornell. And as I came to Cornell, I sort of went back to my roots and did some work on functional programming again. And we worked on an extension of OCaml called CodeCaml, which was basically adding co-induction to OCaml in a sort of more expressive way than what is there natively. And we worked on a series of papers with his student Jean-Baptiste Janin on this. So then I did this postdoc, and I was really happy. But then I got my first tenure track job, and I went back to the Netherlands. I went back to Nijmegen, and I found myself doing coalgebra again. And I did again a bunch of work at the intersection of coalgebra and category theory and automata. After a couple of years, I moved to UCL, to University College London. And at that time, I had started collaborating more intensively with Nate Foster. And my work started shifting much more towards verification. And around the time I moved to UCL, I got a large grant, an ERC starting grant, and I built a team of 5 or 6 people working on topics related to verification. And I'm particularly proud of a paper that I published earlier in 2021 at SIGCOMM, which is one of my most recent verification papers, which appeared at SIGCOMM, so at a networking conference, in which we really used ideas from automata in verification of networks. And this paper was, the first author is a research assistant, an undergraduate student at UCL, Tiago Ferreira. And this is, I would say, one of my proudest papers, because it's also part of mentoring the younger generation into an area. And Tiago, as an undergraduate, brought home this paper that ended up at SIGCOMM, and I'm really proud of this work. And as many of you know, I've recently moved to Cornell, and I've been here now about 4 or 5 months. And if you ask me what are you working on, I still don't know, in the sense that I'm continuing these projects that I had started, but I do feel that I'm shifting again a little bit. And I want to talk in a moment about that, about these shifts and how these things happen. And so you see in this slide, perhaps 2 things. You see a change in topics, but you also see a repetition in topics. So, I did functional programming, and then coalgebra, and then functional programming again, and then coalgebra again, and then verification. And one thing to note is that even though I use these generic labels in the topics I worked on, really, the second time I mentioned functional programming and the second time I mentioned co-algebra, these have different shapes than, the first time I worked on them. And one thing, I want to immediately sort of talk about is how as we go through our careers, we accumulate knowledge and we accumulate taste, and we start looking at topics in different ways. And so when I worked for the second time on this functional programming project with Dexter Cozen and Jean-Baptiste Janine, I had knowledge from co-algebra. I had spent 4 years working on my PhD project on co-induction and co-algebra. So when I got to Cornell and we decided we wanted to do an extension to OCaml, it became natural that I wanted to bring my knowledge into that project. And so we ended up doing an extension involving co-induction and co-algebra and really category theory there. And when I went back to the Netherlands and I again went back to working on more co-algebraic topics, I was bringing the baggage of my knowledge from Cornell and what I had learned from Dexter. And so I started working much more on co-algebra involving clean algebra, which was a topic that, it's one of Dexter's core expertise, and he had taught me a lot about. So as we go through different topics, even though they might look like they have the same flavor, there are differences that start to transpire as the years pass and you get more experience. Now, how did I choose to work on any of these topics, and how come that there's this pattern in maybe my research? So for me, and I think perhaps for many people, it's a mixture of things. So one, I think it's fair to say there's a very big personal component to it. You open a book, you open a paper, you open some proceedings of a conference, and you are naturally attracted to certain topics, to certain types of research. And I think there's that personal component that definitely led me to, for instance, work on functional programming. I had, as an undergrad, learned Haskell as my first language. I loved it. When I learned C, I absolutely hated it. So when the time came to choose a topic for my final project and I saw a chance to work on something related to Haskell again, I jumped on it because I had those happy memories from working, from learning Haskell. Same thing when when I started my PhD and there was this opportunity to work on something that was really more mathematical, and I still had that feeling that what I really wanted to do was mathematics. I jumped at the idea of learning more about category theory and co-algebra. So there's definitely a sort of personal, some personal factors that end up influencing the topic that you choose. Equally important is the context, right? So I was in Portugal in this department where lots of people did functional programming. That's why Joost came as a postdoc, and that's in that context, it was very natural for me to use that opportunity to work with someone who seemed like a nice person and was working on a topic that attracted me in different ways. And this connection with a topic or with a person, to me, plays a big role in the way I choose what I work on. I think for me, research is sort of a collaborative effort. I have very few papers that are single author. I think I probably have one, perhaps two papers that are single author. And for me, this connection with other people, with other researchers is very important. And so if I feel that connection, I am more tempted to learn a new thing or to embark on a new journey. And that is also true of my most recent work with Nate Foster. It was because I had a connection with him that I got really interested in network verification. And so I think there's this multitude of aspects that might play a role in choosing a research topic, and it's not really a flat decision. So let me reflect already on some lessons I learned along the way. By now, I've graduated my PhD 10 years ago, so I sort of have about 15 years of research experience. And I sort of learned some lessons, which again are a personal view on things. One thing is that, as I already said, the topic is one component of your research life. And there are other components that play a role in your happiness and in your enthusiasm to work on something. And so you should remember that the topic is really one part of it, but not the whole story. Working with other people implies compromise, and you have to sort of find the balance whether you want to live with that compromise. So if you're someone who is very obsessed with certain styles, even if it's like the way you write LaTeX or the way you program or the sort of things you work on, you have to sort of decide how you are going to work with other people. It's very rare that you work with someone who has the exact same style or the exact same list of principles. So it's important to realize that if you work with other people, that will most likely imply some sort of I also learned that there are things I don't want to work on and that I will not work on. And equally important, there are people I will not work with. And I think, it is equally important to know what you do not as it is important to know what you want. And I think these lessons, I learned them not so early on in my career. I learned them, let's say, midway through my career. But I now recognize how important it was to basically say no to certain projects, and because it just didn't appeal to me. Time is finite, and if the pandemic has shown us anything, is that our energy is also very, very finite, and it is important to choose the things you work on, and it is important to choose the people you work with, because in the end, all of this creates your energy, your research energy, and it will shape the way you live your research career. So I think it's important to recognize that all these factors will end up influencing how your career evolves. A little bit about the steps, and if you're sort of in the early days, maybe you still didn't enter grad school, or maybe you've just entered grad school. And if you've just entered grad school, you might be at a point where you're sort of shopping around for a supervisor. And the thing is, whether you're an undergrad or an early days grad student, research and research topics and research landscape, it's a mess. I mean, you look around and there's all these possibilities of research directions you might work on. I mean, you're here at PLMW. You might go to Popple this week and look at all the tracks and all the flavors of different PL research that is around, and it can be really overwhelming to see all these options. So in the beginning, it is important to realize that a supervisor or someone more senior will be able to guide you, at least to choose a small set of initial things to look at. And it doesn't mean that those initial things are the things you'll end up working on, but it is important not to overwhelm yourself with 10 topics in the first month of grad school, or when you're an undergrad and you're trying to choose which grad school you want to apply to. It's important to sort of try to narrow down your choices in some way. And so at this point, I would like to start making my talk a little bit interactive, but I'm not quite sure if I will be able to succeed. So basically, I have a couple of questions as we go through, and I would like to try and use reactions to gauge, to see what you think. So let me read out the question and explain what I mean by each of these options. And this will come back in later slides. And then we're going to try to use the Hermite reactions to see what people think is the most important. And then I would also like to use the Q&A feature to get more input. But so let's take one step at a time. So, a supervisor is human, and it has, again, many dimensions. And what do you think that is most important in a supervisor? So number one, experience. So is it important that the supervisor has experience doing research, supervising other students, running a group? So there's many forms of experience. Is it important that your supervisor has knowledge in terms of breadth and depth? Is it important that your supervisor has a wide network of collaborators? Is it important that your supervisor has some empathy? And is it important your supervisor is fun? So I'm not quite sure how we're going to do this, Paul. This is the part I wanted your help, both in the room and in online. So maybe, Paul, you can ask in the room, who agreed with number one, and then with number two, and so on. And then you can tell me which one was more popular. And people can pick the same, can pick multiple answers to this. I just want to get a feeling of what people think it's the most important. And online, if you can react with these emojis, we will try to figure out if we can see which is the most voted line.
Okay, so let's take a hand count in the room. So who thinks that experience is the most important? Couple. Who thinks that knowledge is the most important? Few more. Who thinks that the network is the most important thing in an advisor? Just two. Who thinks that empathy is the most important in an advisor? Oh, a whole bunch. It's by far the most so far. And who thinks that being fun is the most important quality of an advisor? Yeah, so empathy is the clear winner in the room.
Okay, empathy is the clear winner in the room. I'm not sure if online you can see if it's similar or not.
Yeah, same thing in.
Paul, did you?
Yeah, sorry about that. Same thing in the poll.
Empathy.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. Empathy. All right, that is an interesting choice. And I am not completely surprised that is the most popular one. And I would say that it is true that empathy is a very important thing to take into account. And so let me reflect a little bit on that, and then I'm going to say a few things about the others as well. So empathy, you're going to be in grad school for many years. You're going to be having ups and downs. And at points, the thing your supervisor might think is the right topic for you to work on might not be the topic you feel like working on. And there will be moments where you will not be synchronized with the advice of your supervisor. And it is important that there is a relationship in which empathy plays a key role. So, I think that's a very valid choice. I think having your supervisor have some experience and having knowledge of the field, in particularly breadth, it's also important, because it will, he needs to guide you in the beginning towards which topics you might want to look at, and which topics are sort of important, and it needs to recognize in you what you might want to work on. And for that, in order to do that, experience and knowledge will be important. And sometimes the supervisor doesn't have the knowledge in depth of the topic you end up choosing. And that happens very often, that the student really gets enthusiastic about something that is not exactly at the core of the supervisor's research. And at that point, if the supervisor has a good network and knows who works on what, it will be a good way to find you other collaborators or other people you can talk to about your research in depth, and that you can get feedback for your research. I think Liam talked a little bit about this in his talk about how to write a paper and how to get feedback on a paper. And I do think having a good network of people who, I think he also mentioned you should make sure not to end up conflicting yourself with an expert that might be a good reviewer for your paper, but it's about finding a balance of collaborators. And at and people to talk to who talk the same language. And if your supervisor is fun, that's a bonus. I don't think that's the most important thing, but sometimes it can be a bonus. And maybe people have other things they think is important. So I wanted to try and get maybe some feedback live on the Q&A. And maybe in the room, someone wants to mention one or two things that they think is incredibly important on a supervisor.
Any suggestions? Oh, yeah. Prioritization is one suggestion.
Okay.
Energy is another one.
Energy, okay. Those are all good suggestions. Okay, thanks.
Research interest.
Paul, may I also ask how research interest? Okay. May I also ask how long I still have left?
5 minutes. So 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I think all those suggestions that came from the room are equally important, and there might be many others. And I think, again, this is a very personal thing. What people value, what people think is important in a supervisor might differ per person. I had supervisors, both for my PhD and postdoc, that came from quite different backgrounds, and having that breadth of personalities and knowledge was, for me, worked really well. And all these questions we asked and answered about supervisors also apply, to collaborators. I mean, you will, through your research career, you will end up having other collaborators that are not your supervisor. You will meet peers at conferences. You will, meet peers in your own department that you might work with other graduate students. You might work with postdocs that your supervisor, that are in the same group as your supervisor, etc. And again, over and over again, each of these qualities and also the others that were mentioned are important. In view of time, I'm not going to take votes anymore, but I think you get a feeling for what I'm getting at. I think there are dimensions of both your own research, direct research with your supervisor, and then later on with collaborators that are important. And another thing I shall say about both the supervisor and collaborators is that they can be extremely inspiring. And as the audience said, the energy and research interests of a supervisor, of a collaborator, are extremely important. So in my own career, I should mention that, like, one of my most successful collaborations with Nate Foster, and I think the success of that collaboration comes very much from the energy that we give each other, or at least he gives me, and the inspiration on the things he works on. And for me, that played a key role in sort of me shifting the topics I was working on. And then, as you go on with your career, there comes students, there comes a point where you become the supervisor. And then again, even for students, you might again ask the same question: and what is important when you are working with students, and what is the most important thing in students? And of course, the students don't have experience in the same way that a supervisor or a collaborator might have, but they do come with some experience that is different than yours. They do come with knowledge that is different than yours. They do come with their own personal network of peers that is different than yours. And all of those things can be extremely inspiring in terms of research. And it is the collaborators and the students that sometimes bring topics into your life that you didn't expect would come into your research career. And I think, this aspect of you have an idea of what research topic you want to work on, and then you work with other people, whether that's supervisors or collaborators or students, and suddenly you find yourself working on a topic you never imagined you would be working on. So the research topic kind of found yourself. And here's a picture of me going to the last POPL that happened in person in New Orleans with some of my students who are extremely fun and inspiring people. And then beyond your direct network of collaborators, students, there's a wide research community out there. And we are here at PLMW. We are part of the programming languages community. And this is PLMW Popple, which is about principles of programming languages. And the community has an identity. And so, you might also wonder when you are joining a community and when you're moving between communities, what are the things that you value in a research community? Is it that there's lots of hot topics to work on? Is it that, the community is very welcoming to new members and there's lots of mentoring events? Is that the community is collaborative? Is that, the community put effort in building good teaching materials for new students? Is it that the conferences are a lot of fun? So there's a lot of, again, dimensions in a community that might attract you to that research community and might shape the door through which you enter towards choosing a topic. And there are other things in the community that matter. I would like to spend the last couple of minutes talking about a couple of other things and making a few reflections. I think Liam or someone showed this picture earlier today. This is due to Matt Might, and it's about what it means to do a PhD. And Matt Might has this circle of knowledge, and then you at the end you make this little dent. And if you look at this circle and you see that your dent is so tiny, you can barely see it in my slide, you might feel. And this is, I think, for me, one of the most important things that was also said by the audience is the energy and the enthusiasm that you can attach to your research and your research topic. And in the context of the really important, because there will be lonely moments, there will be hard moments where you're pushing the boundary, you're trying to make that dent, and it's hard, and your papers get rejected. And so at that point, the energy and the enthusiasm is what keeps you going. But don't pulling you back as well, because sometimes it's important to just keep moving, even if slowly, even if things are not working exactly as you expected. It's important to just keep doing things and keep moving towards, towards working in your research. And finally, I think it's important to say than the research topic, it's also important to find your style. And just for fun, I will briefly show this Twitter thread by Jin Yang, in which she compares Taylor Swift to a bunch of famous papers, paper by Tony Hoare and Couzeau and Greg Morissette and Xavier Leroy, one of the Popple most influential papers. And it's sort of a fun post, but why is style important? So in the end, style is important because it's what defines you as a researcher in some ways. And style, again, comes in the sort of topic you use, but also in the way you write, in the way you present. And it's important to find that style that you're comfortable with. And I think people have different styles, and different styles are important. And we are a diverse community, we are a colorful community, and that's fun. And it's important also to sort of inspire other people. So I think through your graduate school time and later on, it's important to always remember to find your own identity, and that comes with your style. More practically, if you're wondering, what about in practical terms? Everything you're saying is very abstract. Read a lot of papers, of introductions at least. Watch some talks from Popple and other SIGPlan conferences. Talk to people whose work you like. If you read a paper and you really like it, send an email to the authors. Everyone likes getting emails about their work. Talk to your peers, to the people you met at PLMW, to the people you might meet at OPLSS. People you meet at schools and conferences, they become a great support group, also in finding new topics. And these days, there's a lot of PL discussions happening on Twitter, so it's also a good source of inspiration. And lastly, I guess, I wanted to spend just a minute, even though I'm already over time, on wrong. Sometimes you work on a topic for a few years and then you realize you do not like it. Sometimes you have a collaboration breakdown. Your work keeps getting rejected. You have conflicts with your supervisor. you might be struggling with some mental health issues. What do you do when things go wrong? I think it's important to remember that we're all human and sometimes things go wrong and there's no secret recipe, but my personal advice is to take a step back, realize that the world out there is really large and you don't need to work with the same people and on the same things all the time. And you can actually shift your energy towards something that makes you happier. So finding a matching topic is important for your happiness and for your career, but there's no secret recipe. And this is a multidimensional decision and it has a lot of external factors. So don't think there's just one topic that you will be happy doing. Realize that through your career, there will be many topics. A topic is not forever because your research evolves with the years, both topic-wise and style-wise. And sometimes the topic finds you because of students, of collaborators. And I will end with a quote from this morning's panel by Stephanie: research is a conversation. And I think the most important thing to remember is keep talking to other people, keep learning what other people are interested in, tell them about the things you are interested in, and make them interested in the things that give you happiness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? We have a few minutes. Are there any questions in the chat? No. Well, if there are any questions, you can always ask later. So I will be around throughout the rest of Popple. And so Hannah, I don't think she's in the room right now. So you are more than welcome to come talk to me later if you think of some questions that didn't come to you during this talk, whether or not it's a meta question about how to Popple or a question about one of these topics or research. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the talk. One maybe question I have for you is, are there signs that you should either like drop a research topic or pivot a research topic?
That's a good question. I think if you've been working on something for a long time and you're not making progress towards the goal that you've set or that you and your collaborators set together, then I think you should have a deadline. So you should say, okay, if we work on this and we try our best and we don't make progress within 2, then we should pause it. It doesn't mean you never go back to it again, but you can pause it and do something else. Or as you said, you can pivot it slightly and say, okay, let's take the question we were working on and let's try to ask a different question or ask it from a different perspective. Or sometimes the problem you're trying to solve is too hard. And so sometimes you need to take a step back and identify a sub-problem that you can work on for a while and solve that sub-problem first before you can make progress on the larger problem. So I think it's important to recognize one's limitations. And I think it's also important to recognize when you're frustrated. I think that's a skill that you need to learn as you start doing research. You need to learn to not get frustrated too quickly, but also to recognize when you're really frustrated and you should be sort of shifting to something else for a while.
Any other questions?
I mean, so in any field, but in PL for sure, there are some areas where you can sort of get the basics enough to do research from your